There is a road in Pennsylvania that most maps don't bother naming anymore. It runs past a red-covered bridge, past a dairy farm, past a stand of hardwoods that go gold and rust every October. And then it turns to dirt. And at the end of that dirt road there is a building that has been silent for 30 years. Except for one thing. One note. Low and steady. No louder than a held breath. Coming from somewhere deep inside those dark walls, swelling when the valley wind comes down off the ridge and fading when the wind lets go. Not a moan, not a draft finding a crack, a pitch, a true held musical pitch. Exactly the note an organ builder lays under everything else before he builds anything on top of it. The building has been empty since October of 1994. The man who built it died at his workbench with a voicing knife still in his hand. And in the 30 years since, not one person who walked past that door stopped long enough to hear what was still alive inside it. Until a 21-year-old girl with a worn leather satchel, a grandmother's tuning fork, and exactly $1 walked to the end of that forgotten road, stopped, and listened. What she found inside that workshop will take your breath away. Not because it was worth $31,000, but because of what the man who left it was trying to say. Stay with me. The road didn't have a name anymore. It used to. Wren had seen it on the county surplus map, a thin pencil line labeled Wicket Mill Road running off the edge of the page like the cartographer had simply run out of interest. But out here, past the red-covered bridge where the boards drummed hollow under her boots, past the dairy farm with its pale November mud, past the stand of hardwoods gone gold and rust, and finally bare, the road just became dirt. And the dirt just became ruts. And the ruts just became a question nobody had bothered to answer in a long time. Wren Caldwell walked it anyway. She was 21 years old. She had a worn leather satchel on one shoulder and $1 in the front pocket of her jeans and a grandmother's tuning fork on a cord around her neck. The satchel held 2 changes of clothes, a small framed photograph, and a wooden pipe no bigger than a man's forearm wrapped in a wool sock. Everything else she had owned was either still in a boarding house in Allentown that the county had condemned for its wiring in September, or it wasn't worth carrying. She was not lost. That was the thing she kept telling herself. A person walking towards something is not lost, even if the something costs $1. Even if she couldn't entirely explain standing in the cold November light why she had spent her last bus fare to get here instead of anywhere else. The county surplus notice had been pinned to the board outside the post office in a town called Stoverton, hand-typed on yellowed paper, thumbtacked at a slant the way things get pinned when nobody expects anyone to read them. Organ Builder Workshop, Wicket Mill Road, $1. She'd stood in front of that notice for a long time. She knew what an organ builder's workshop was. She knew what it smelled like. Old glue and beeswax and wood dust gone to powder, and the particular warmth of leather bellows that had been breathing for decades. She knew because her grandmother had kept a back room behind a Lutheran parish hall up in the Slate country near Aldine, and that room had smelled exactly like that, and Wren had spent more hours in it than she had spent in any classroom in her life. Her grandmother was Mabel Caldwell, and Mabel Caldwell was gone. 2 years, 3 months, and some days that Wren had stopped counting because counting made it worse. So she pulled the notice off the board, folded it into her pocket, and spent the last of her Allentown money on a bus ticket north. And now she was walking the last 2 miles to the end of a road that didn't have a name anymore in November, with $1 and a dead woman's tuning fork and no plan worth naming. Not lost, just pointed. She heard it before she saw the building. One note, low, steady, coming in on the wind and breathing back out when the wind dropped. Not loud, not dramatic, quieter than a hymn. About as loud as someone in the next room humming to themselves because they've forgotten they're doing it. Wren stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the dirt road with the cold coming down off the ridge, and she listened with the kind of attention she had learned not in any school, but at her grandmother's knee. One ear tilted, eyes gone soft, breath held. It was a pitch, not a draft moaning through a crack, not wind finding a loose board. A held, true musical pitch, the low foundation note an organ builder lays under everything before he builds anything on top of it. Something in her chest moved toward it the way a compass needle moves. She started walking again, faster. The workshop came into view around the last bend. Board and batten siding gone the gray of old barnwood. A field stone chimney cold. A carved sign over the door, worn down to a shadow of letters, the name of whoever had built it, rubbed out by 30 winters, until only the shape of care remained. The tall, arched windows filmed with grime. The whole building hunkered into the hillside like something that had decided a long time ago to stop asking for attention and just endure. And from inside it, that note. Wren walked up to the door and put her hand flat on the wood. The note hummed faintly through the grain, low and even, like a sleeping pulse. She stood there a moment, hand on the door, not going in yet, because Mabel had taught her that. You stop before you enter a room where something is still alive. You listen first. You let the room know you're paying attention before you ask it to speak to you. An instrument that is not listened to is just wood and wire and leather. The listening is what makes it an instrument. Wren listened. Then she went to find the man with the key. The township office was in a converted feed store on Stoverton's Main Street, which was also the only street, which was also the state route that passed through without slowing down very much. The sign on the door said Stoverton Township Clerk Notary Historical Society, and Wren had a feeling that all three of those things were the same person. She was right. Crispin Vane was in his early 60s, lean and deliberate, with the kind of face that had spent decades in careful thought and had the lines to show for it. He was sitting behind a counter that still had a grain scale bolted to one end, writing something in a ledger with a fountain pen, and he did not look up immediately when Wren came in. She told him what she was looking for. He set down his pen. He looked at her for a long moment, not rudely. The way you look at something you weren't expecting, something that makes an old thought rearrange itself into a new shape. Then he said, "How did you find out about it?" Not a question, just the sentence set down flat. "Surplus board," Wren said, "outside the post office." "That notice has been up for 11 years, he said. "Nobody's ever asked." "I'm asking." He was quiet another moment. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a ledger of a different kind. Older, its spine cracked, and he opened it and ran his finger down a column and stopped. "Wicket Mill Road," he said. "Organ Builder Workshop. Surplus since October of 1994. He looked up. $1. "Yes." He looked at her again. Really looked. The tuning fork on its cord around her neck, the worn leather of the satchel, the particular way she was standing weight forward like someone who has walked a distance and is prepared to walk further. "You wouldn't be any kin to Mabel Caldwell," he said, the name in his mouth from a stranger's throat. Wren felt it move through her like the low note through the door. "She was my grandmother," she said. Crispin Vane took off his glasses, set them on the counter, was quiet for a moment that had some weight to it. Then he reached into the bottom drawer of the desk, the kind of reach a man makes when he's going somewhere he hasn't gone in a while, and he set an iron key on the counter between them, heavy and dark braided cord worn smooth with old handling. "Elias Drummond gave me this key the winter before he passed," he said, "October of 1993. He told me to hold it, for whoever could still hear a pipe speak." He paused. "I asked him what on earth that was supposed to mean. He just smiled and said I'd know them when they walked in." He slid the key across the counter. "That key has been in that drawer for 28 years. You're the first person who's come in asking." He looked at the tuning fork again. "Mabel came out to Elias's shop once, long time back, maybe 1987, 1988. She had a cracked reed she couldn't quiet. The two of them stood at his bench from after dinner till past dark. Barely a word, just listening to a pipe speak and stop and speak." He picked up his pen again, opened the sale ledger to a fresh page. "He told me after that she was the only other person in this valley who heard an organ instead of just hearing it loud." Wren paid her $1. Crispin wrote the receipt out by hand, stamped it with a rubber stamp that said, "Stoverton Township Clerk" in faded blue ink, slid it across. Wren folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her satchel, flat against the photograph of Mabel. She walked back out into the November cold with the iron key warm in her fist. 2 miles back out Wicket Mill Road, across the covered bridge where the boards drummed, past the dairy farm and the bare hardwoods, and the note came back to her before the building did, riding the wind down off the ridge low and steady, the way it had been riding that wind for 30 years without anyone to hear it. She fit the key to the lock. It resisted, The way a mechanism resists when the oil has gone to varnish and nothing has moved in a very long time. She felt the resistance travel up her arm. She turned it anyway, slowly, steadily, the way Mabel had taught her to ease a stuck pipe. You don't force it, you just keep a constant patient pressure until the thing remembers how to move. The lock turned with a gritty groan, the door swung open, and the smell came out to meet her. Old glue, beeswax, wood dust gone to powder, cold stone, and underneath all of it, faint and sweet and heartbreaking, the particular warmth of leather that has been breathing for decades in a closed room, holding the shape of the bellows it once formed, remembering what it was made to do. Wren stood in the doorway and did not move. The shop was large, larger than she'd expected. High ceilings with exposed rafters, a plank floor that had gone dark with decades of oil and sawdust and feet that were no longer moving across it. Late afternoon light came gray through the tall, arched windows and lay in pale rectangles across the floor and across the workbenches and across the ranked tools on the walls and across the thing that stood against the far wall rising nearly to the rafters. The organ. She moved toward it slowly. Because she had grown up knowing what an organ in progress looked like, the half-finished instruments in Mabel's back room, a rank of reeds waiting to be voiced, a wind chest open on the bench like a patient waiting for a surgeon. But she had never seen anything like this. This was not half-finished. This was complete. The oak case was unstained and raw, never polished, the wood the color of old honey in the gray light. The keyboards were fitted 2 manuals and a set of pedals below the keys, ivory and ebony and waiting. The great leather bellows sagged and collapsed like a sleeping animal, its leather gone stiff with cold and time. And ranged across the front of the instrument in rows upon rows the pipes. Slim spotted metal pipes in their racks, silver in the dim light. Square wooden pipes stepping up in size, each one fitted and seated. Little stop pipes no bigger than a finger. Tall open pipes rising to the case top. Hundreds of them. All of them silent. And Wren understood, moving closer, reading them the way Mabel had taught her to read a pipe by the cut of its mouth and the set of its languid, that not one of these pipes had ever been voiced. Each rack had a small slip of paper tucked beside it in a careful slanting hand. A stop name. A pitch. Open diapason 8 foot. Stopped wood 8 foot. Voix celeste to be tuned last when the room is warm. The whole instrument built and racked and ready, and never once taught to speak. She stood in front of that silence for a long time, the cold of the unheated room settling around her, the smell of old wood and old patience filling her lungs. And then from the left end of the organ, set a little apart against the cold fieldstone wall, came the note. She crossed to it. Standing free of the case, lashed upright to an iron bracket set into the stone, was a single enormous wooden pipe. Pedal pipe. Square in section. Taller than 2 men placed end to end. Its dark oak boards fitted and joined with the kind of fine, tight joinery that takes decades to learn. Its great mouth cut low near the floor, wide and patient, and from somewhere in its tall throat, in the cold and the silence of a room that had been empty for 30 years, came a sound. Low, warm, steady. Not a moan, not a rattle. A held round musical pitch, swelling when the wind pressed at the loose boards of the building, sighing back down when the wind let go, but never stopping, never faltering, never losing the pitch. Wren laid her palm flat against the dark oak side of the pipe. The note moved up through her hand, low and warm and unhurried, in tune with itself. No hiss at the front of it, no waver at the end. Voiced true. Voiced the way Mabel had described it 100 times, a sound that opens like a held breath. When the voice is true, the pipe is in tune with itself before it is ever in tune with its neighbors. And a pipe voiced true will speak the same the day it is made and 100 years after the maker is gone. Wren stood with her palm against the breathing oak and felt the note hum up through her bones, and she did not cry. She had done her crying. What she felt now was something quieter than grief and louder than hope. The feeling of something fitting that has been loose for a long time. Like a reed finally finding its pitch after a winter of silence. She did not understand yet how it could be speaking with no bellows, pumping, no keys pressed, no hand at the wind. She only knew that of every voice in that silent room, this one alone had refused to fall quiet. She slept on the bare plank floor that first night, her coat for a blanket, the satchel for a pillow. The note kept her company in the dark. Steady and unhurried, swelling and sighing with the wind outside the way, Mabel's bellows had breathed in the back room when Wren was small and had sometimes fallen asleep on the floor there listening. She woke to gray light and the low note and the sound of a truck slowing on the road outside. The truck was an old Dodge rusted at the wheel wells, and the man who climbed down from it was in his early 70s, deliberate in the way he moved, the way men move when their bodies have earned their rest but keep being asked to work anyway. He had a covered dish in both hands, and he was looking at the workshop the way you look at a house where someone you knew used to live. He took his cap off when Wren opened the door. "Oleander Briggs," he said. "People call me Ollie. I farm the bottom land down past the bridge." He nodded past her at the dark room. "I saw a light moving in there last night. Figured it was kids again. My wife sent me up with the dish on account of you can't argue with somebody who's bringing you food." Then the valley wind came down the ridge, and the great pipe breathed its low note, and Ollie Briggs' face changed. He went very still, the covered dish held out in both hands, his eyes moving past Wren to the tall, dark pipe against the fieldstone wall. Something working in his expression that was too complicated and too private to name. "Lord," he said quietly. Still talking after all these years. They sat on a sawhorse in an overturned crate in the doorway and ate his wife's dish, which was warm and rich, some kind of braised chicken with root vegetables that tasted of thyme and wood smoke and more care than Wren had experienced in months. She ate slowly. She was very hungry. Ollie talked while she ate. He had known Elias Drummond for 50 years. Met him the year Elias came up to Stoverton 1961, came for the cheap rent and the quiet two things that were good for fine work and for hearing. Elias had never married, worked late by lamplight, kept the workshop the way certain solitary people keep their solitary spaces organized down to the last voicing knife. Because when you work alone, you have to be able to find everything yourself in the dark. 5 counties brought their wheezing church organs to him, Ollie said. You had an instrument that had gone sour, you went to Elias. He'd put his ear against it and tell you which rank before he ever opened the case. Like my grandmother, Wren said. Ollie looked at her. Crispin told me about Mabel, on the phone this morning. He set his fork down. She came out here once, I remember it, late 80s. She and Elias stood at that bench in there from supper time till past dark. I stopped in to check on him and the two of them didn't even look up, just standing there listening to a pipe stop and start and stop. He looked at the great pipe against the wall. He called that one his ground, he said. Said an organ builder who can't lay one true low note under everything has no business building anything on top of it. How does it speak? Wren asked. There's no wind, no bellows. Ollie was quiet a moment, like a man considering how much of a thing to tell. I helped him build it, he said finally. Spring of 1968. We spent 3 weekends chiseling a channel through the foundation stone. From a vent at the base of the north wall, up through the floor, into the foot of that pipe. He looked at the building around them. When the valley wind comes down the ridge and presses on the stone, it draws a steady draft up through the channel, just enough, just barely enough to make the mouth speak. He looked at Wren. He built the shop to breathe through one pipe, so the shop would always have one voice still living in it. He shook his head slowly. I helped him do it, and I still couldn't tell you entirely why. He just said a workshop with one voice still living is a workshop that's only resting, not dead. Wren looked at the great pipe. A workshop that's only resting. She thought of the 41 ranks in the dark behind her, all those silent mouths, all that held breath, not dead, waiting. That afternoon she walked the organ with her hands. She moved slowly. She read each rank the way Mabel had taught her to read, not just looking, but listening with her fingertips, feeling the cut of each pipe mouth, the angle of the languid, the careful graduated scaling that stepped each pipe up in size by an exact mathematical proportion. Whoever built these ranks knew what they were doing, knew it the way people know things they have spent decades learning in the dark. Each rank had its slip of paper in that careful, slanting hand. She read them all. Open diapason 8 foot. Principal 4 foot. 15th 2 foot. Stop diapason 8 foot. Salitional 8-foot. Voix celeste 8-foot to be tuned last when the room is warm. Trumpet 8-foot. Tuba 8-foot. Pedal Borden 16-foot. 41 ranks. 41 stop names in that careful hand, and beside each one a scaling note, a mouth width, a cut specification, everything a voicer would need to give each pipe its speech. Elias Drummond had not left an unfinished instrument. He had left a finished instrument with no voice yet in it. Every piece in place, every pipe seated, the whole elaborate architecture of the thing complete and ready and waiting for one thing, for someone to come and teach it to speak. Wren stood in front of the silent ranks in the late afternoon light and understood for the first time the full weight of what she was standing in. Not a salvage job, not a restoration, a continuation. He had built everything he could build, and then left the one thing that couldn't be built, only heard for someone else to finish. The last entry in the slip for the Voix Celeste said simply, "Listen until you can hear when it's true. You'll know." Wren reached out and touched the mouth of the nearest pipe. Cold metal. Patient. You'll know. On the second day, Ollie came back, and this time he brought a jar of preserves his wife had put up, and the answer to the question Wren hadn't asked yet. She had been wondering about Elias. Not the workshop, not the organ, but the man. What kind of person builds something that large and that careful and leaves it unfinished? What kind of person cuts a channel through foundation stone so that one note will keep breathing after he's gone? He had a student, Ollie said. He said it the way people say things they've been carrying a while, setting it down carefully. Young man, son of an old friend of Elias's from down in Kutztown, came up in 1979, maybe 19 years old. Elias took him on, 3 years. He stopped. What happened? Wren said. He left. Ollie turned the jar of preserves in his hands. 1982. A manufacturing company over in Harrisburg was hiring draftsmen, good pay, steady hours. The boy had a girl he wanted to marry and a life he wanted to live, and the organ trade was already starting to shrink, and Elias was the last of a kind of person who was already going rare. He paused. Elias didn't say much about it. You know how some people get quiet around a hurt instead of loud. Wren knew. He never took on another student after that, Ollie said, and whenever anybody asked him why, he'd just say the same thing. He looked at her, said he'd leave the trade for the person who didn't know yet that they needed it. He set the preserves on the workbench. I think he meant you, he said. I think he always meant someone like you. He just had to wait until you showed up. Wait until... That night, alone in the workshop with the low note keeping her company in the dark, Wren took the small wooden pipe from the satchel, the one Mabel had pressed into her hands that last summer, no taller than a man's forearm, beveled mouth, wax-stopped foot. Her grandmother's father had made it and voiced it by hand, and the note that came from it when you blew across its mouth was warm and round and a little sad. She set it on the windowsill in the gap where the cold air moved through the loose frame. She had to try it twice to find the right angle. But then, a low whisper of sound, not as full as the great pipe, but the same quality, the same patient accuracy, a voiced pipe, trusting the air to hold it. She stood listening to it for a long time. Keep it where the wind can find it, Mabel had said, and it will keep your days honest. On the third morning, a truck Wren didn't recognize pulled up. A woman in her late 70s climbed down carefully, moving like someone who had recently had reason to be careful. She had a tin in one hand and a deliberate expression and silver hair cut short. She looked at the building and then at Wren, and she said, "You're the one who bought it." "I am," Wren said. "I kept house for Elias his last 10 years, the woman said. "My name is Sybil Pell, and I have a tin of choufle pie and the exact way he liked his leather glue, mixed 2 parts to 1 and warm." She looked past Wren at the open door, at the dark interior. "And I'd like to hear that pipe still breathing before I say anything else." Wren stepped aside. Sybil walked in. Slowly. She moved down the length of the workbenches without touching anything, reading the room the way someone reads a place they have been in their mind for a long time. She stopped at the great pipe against the wall, stood in front of it. And when the wind came down the ridge and the note swelled up from its dark throat, she put one hand against the oak and closed her eyes. They stood there in the sound of it together. And then Sybil Pell said something that sat in Wren's chest like a stone, not heavy in a bad way, but solid, something to stand on. "He didn't finish it," she said. "Not a question. He never voiced any of it. I always wondered." She opened her eyes. "I think he knew toward the end that the right person hadn't come yet, and he didn't want to voice the wrong voice into all those pipes and have it be the wrong voice forever." She looked at Wren. "A pipe voiced wrong will speak wrong its whole life. You can't unvoice it without starting over." She paused. He was waiting for someone who would hear them right. The wind shifted outside. The note dropped and steadied. "Do you know how to voice a pipe?" Sybil said. "My grandmother taught me," Wren said. Sybil nodded once. The way people nod when something they suspected turns out to be true. "Then you'd better get started," she said. "There are 41 ranks in there that have been holding their breath since 1994. She set the tin of shoofly pie on the workbench. She showed Wren how Elias liked his leather glue. 2 parts to 1, warm but not hot, and you stir it only in one direction, or it tells you so by the smell. And in the afternoon, in the pale November light coming through the tall windows, Wren Caldwell went back to the organ and began to learn the room. She moved down each rank slowly, reading every slip, checking every pipe mouth against its neighbor. And she found what she had begun to suspect. The whole instrument was not just ready to be voiced. It was ready to be voiced in a particular order. The slips were numbered faint pencil numbers in the corner of each one, so small she had almost missed them. Elias had laid out the sequence. Which ranks to voice first to establish the foundation? Which to build on top of that? Which to leave until the room had warmed and the bellows were working and every earlier voice was stable and true? A plan. Not an abandoned project, a plan waiting for its next person. She took one small stopped wooden pipe from its rack, the smallest numbered one, the first in the sequence. She set it to the little wind tester on the bench, the rubber bulb that Elias had kept hanging on a nail, the same tool Mabel had used in the back room behind the parish hall. She pumped it gently. The pipe overbroke on the first try, a thin, reedy squeal, too much wind at the mouth. She cut the wind back, adjusted the languid with the finest movement of the voicing knife, a hair less than a hair. The pipe tried again. Better. Closer. She cut again. So small the knife barely moved. And the pipe spoke, round and warm. Stopped tone, the particular quality of a capped wooden pipe, like a voice held gently in a room, no edge, no force, just the note arriving clean and settling there. Wren sat very still, and then she laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, startling her in the empty room. She hadn't heard herself laugh like that, the real kind, the kind that comes up without permission in a very long time. The trade was still in her hands. Mabel's trade. Mabel's grandmother's trade. Passed down through years in rooms that smelled of beeswax and felt and warm bellows, still in her hands, waiting in her fingers and her ears, the way a language you learn very young waits patient underneath everything else. She set the voice pipe back in its rack. The note it had just made was the first new voice in this room in 30 years. One voice. Out of 41 ranks. She looked down the long, silent rows of pipes in the late afternoon light, all those patient mouths, all that held breath. And she thought about what Ollie had said. A workshop with one voice still living is a workshop that's only resting. She looked at the great pipe breathing against the fieldstone wall. Then she looked at the tiny stopped pipe she had just voiced sitting in its rack waiting. 2 voices now. 2. She went to the windowsill and blew across the mouth of Mabel's little wooden pipe. The warm, round, slightly sad note rose in the cold room and hung there. 3. Outside, the copper light was fading off the ridge. The township road was empty. The covered bridge was a dark shape at the bottom of the hill. The valley was going quiet the way Pennsylvania valleys go quiet in November, settling into itself, the hills pulling their dark up around them, the cold coming down clean off the higher ground. Inside the workshop, the great pipe breathed its low note against the fieldstone. And somewhere in the rack, one small stopped pipe sat voiced and ready, holding the first true sound it had ever made, waiting for the 41 ranks around it to learn one by one the same thing. How to speak. Wren sat on the floor with her back against the warm fieldstone and the low note keeping her company in the growing dark. and she felt the ground extend just slightly, just a little further past the edge of where it had been before. She was 21 years old. She had $1 worth of building and a grandmother's worth of trade. And for the first time since Allentown, since the hardware store, since the boarding house and the rented school pianos and the room that had cost too much and given back too little, for the first time in a long time, she knew exactly which direction to face. She did not know yet what was in the foot of the great pipe. She did not know yet about Elias Drummond's careful voicing book, or the 30 years of hymns he had given away quietly for nothing, or the 29 gold coins put by coin over a working life. She did not know yet about the little treble pipe wrapped in soft chamois at the bottom of the tall dark throat, the one pipe in the whole shop that Elias had voiced himself with its fine inscribed mark and its 4 words that would stop her cold when she finally read them. She did not know yet about the letter. And she did not know yet about Sutton Drummond, who was a lawyer in Philadelphia, and who was going to walk into this workshop without knocking in exactly 11 days with papers in his hand and a way of looking at the room that had nothing to do with listening. But all of that was coming. For now the low note breathed in the dark, and Wren breathed with it, and the shop rested around them both. And somewhere outside the valley, wind came down off the ridge and pressed through the channel in the foundation stone and through the foot of the great pipe, and up its dark throat and out its patient mouth, the same way it had been pressing for 30 years, keeping one note alive in the cold and the quiet for exactly this, for someone who would stop at the door and listen before they came in. The second week began with cold. Not the polite November cold of the first days. This was December cold, the kind that gets into the gaps of old board and batten siding and stays there, the kind that makes the plank floor feel like stone and the stone walls feel like something older than stone, something that has been cold so long it has forgotten what warmth means. Wren woke before light on Monday and lay still for a moment listening. The note was there, low and steady, swelling as the pre-dawn wind came down the ridge, settling back when the wind let go, patient as it had always been. Patient as it had been for 30 years before she arrived and would be, she suspected, for 30 years after she was gone if she didn't get the chimney swept and the wood stove working before the cold got serious. She got up. She had a list. She kept it on the back of a brown paper bag because that was what she had. Roof, chimney, bellows leather, window glazing on the north side. And somewhere at the bottom of the list in letters smaller than the rest because writing it large made it feel impossible, voice all 41 ranks. One thing at a time, Mabel used to say. You don't tune a whole organ at once. You tune one pipe, then its neighbor, then you listen to them together, and you keep going until the room is full of something true. One pipe at a time. Wren put the kettle on the camp stove she'd bought at the Stoverton hardware store for $14 and stood with her hands wrapped around a mug and looked at the organ in the early gray light, the great silent ranks, all those patient mouths. 4 pipes voiced so far, 37 ranks to go. She had $1 worth of building and about 2 weeks of savings left, and she was beginning to understand a plan. It was Ollie who solved the immediate problem, the way Ollie solved most immediate problems, by showing up with something before she had thought to ask for it. He arrived that Monday morning with 2 men from the bottom farm and a load of seasoned ash for the wood stove, and by noon the chimney had been swept, the stove was drawing clean, and the workshop was for the first time since October of 1994 warm. Actually warm, not just survivable. Wren stood in the center of the room and felt the warmth moving out from the stove, and she thought absurdly of the note. How it would change now. How a pipe sounds different in a warm room than a cold one, the air moving differently, the pitch shifting fractionally upward as temperature rose. She would need to account for that. The voix celeste especially, which Elias had noted must be tuned last when the room is warm, he had thought of everything. She crossed to the voicing bench and picked up where she had left off. The work had a rhythm to it now. She would take a pipe from its rack, set it to the wind tester, listen, adjust, listen again. The adjustments were tiny. A voicing knife moved by the width of a human hair could change a pipe from a shriek to a song. Too much wind at the mouth and the pipe overbroke, climbing an octave, screaming. Too little and it whispered thin and unconvincing. The sweet spot was narrow and exact and different for every single pipe, even within the same rank, because no 2 pieces of wood breathe exactly alike. Mabel had taught her that. Every voice is its own thing. You can't assume. You can't copy what worked for the last one. You listen fresh every time. By midweek, she had voiced 9 pipes. Small ones. Stopped wood, the first rank, the little foundational voices that would sit under everything else and give the whole instrument its warmth. She had set each one back in its rack, and when she pressed the wind tester to the chest and played them together all 9 at once, the sound that came out of the organ for the first time was small and imperfect and absolutely real. She pressed her forehead against the case and stayed there a moment. 9 pipes. Not 41 ranks. 9 pipes out of hundreds. But 9 pipes that had never spoken before and were speaking now. Sybil Pell came on Thursday with a pot of something that smelled of onions and bay, and a shopping bag of things Wren hadn't known she needed. Beeswax blocks for the leather, a roll of new gasketing material, a small brass lamp with extra oil because Sybil had decided without asking that Wren was working too late by insufficient light, and that was going to stop. She set the lamp onto the voicing bench with the air of someone who has made a decision and is not taking questions. "How many?" she said, looking at the organ. 9 pipes, Wren said. "First rank almost done." Sybil nodded. She walked to the organ and pressed her ear against the case the way a doctor listens to a chest. Wren pumped the wind tester and played the 9 pipes. Sybil listened, her eyes closed. "Good," she said. "Just that." From Sybil, that was about the equivalent of a standing ovation. They ate at the workbench, the pot between them, and Sybil talked about Elias the way people talk about the dead when they've been given permission to remember properly. Not the careful, edited version. The real one. He had been a difficult man to know, she said. Not cold, not unkind, but self-contained in a way that most people mistook for distance. He kept the workshop the way he kept himself, everything in its place. Nothing decorative, nothing without a purpose. He was generous in ways he would not let you notice, and stubborn in ways that occasionally made her want to throw something. He once spent 14 hours on a single pipe, she said. 1 pipe, from a small country church over in Weaver County that couldn't pay him more than $40 for the whole job. 14 hours because the pipe wouldn't speak right, and he would not let it go until it did. "Why couldn't it speak right?" Wren said. "The wood had a twist in the grain," Sybil said. "Very small. You couldn't see it. He felt it with his thumb." She looked at the organ. "He said a pipe with a twisted grain would always fight its own voice, and you could force it to speak the note you wanted, but it would always sound like something arguing with itself. And he wouldn't have that." She picked up her spoon. "He fixed it," she said. "Of course." Of course. And then on Saturday, Sybil said something that lodged in Wren like a splinter. Not painful, but present. The kind of thing you keep noticing. They had been talking about the student, the one who had come in 1979 and left in 1982. "What was his name?" Wren said. Sybil set down her cup. "Drummond," she said. Wren looked up. "Not a relation," Sybil said, watching her face. "Or, well, a distant one. Old family name in this county. The boy's father had been a friend of Elias's since before the war. Different branch entirely." She paused. "Though," she stopped. "Though what?" Wren said. "There was another one," Sybil said slowly. "Another Drummond, not the student. Elias had a nephew of some kind, or a great-nephew, I was never entirely clear. From his father's side, lived down in the city, Philadelphia, I think." She was quiet a moment. "He came once," she said. "I remember it because it was the only time in 10 years I saw Elias genuinely unsettled." She looked at the dark workshop walls. September of 1994, a month before Elias passed. A man came. I didn't meet him. I only saw him through the window walking to the door. Tall, city clothes, the way he walked. She paused. I asked Elias about it after. He said it was nothing. Family business. "Family business?" Wren repeated. "Elias closed the shop for 3 days after," Sybil said. "Wouldn't say why. And then he went back to work and didn't speak of it again and was dead 5 weeks later." The wind came down the ridge outside. The great pipe breathed. "I always wondered," Sybil said quietly, "about that man." Wren thought about it that night, lying on her cot, the wood stove ticking as it cooled the low note steady in the dark. A man in city clothes. September of 1994, a month before Elias died with the voicing knife still in his hand. She fell asleep wondering. She found the voicing book on a Tuesday. Or rather, she found what led her to the voicing book. She had been working on the great pedal pipe that morning, not voicing it. It was already voiced, the one voice in the shop that needed no help from her, but the foot leather was stiff with age. She started with the voicing book, not because she had a plan yet, but because Mabel had taught her that when you don't know what to do next, you go back to what you know. You go back to the work. You go back to the thing that is true and let it show you the way forward. So she sat at the bench with the lamp lit and the wood stove ticking and the low note breathing in the dark around her, and she read the voicing book from the beginning. All of it. Every entry, every church, every town, every year stretching back to 1963 when Elias Drummond had first set up his bench in this workshop and begun keeping the record of what he did and who he did it for and what it cost them. She read slowly. The way you read something when you are looking for a thing you don't yet know the name of. Faith Chapel, Ardell Township, 1963. First Reformed Kettlebrook, 1967. St. Anselm's, Weaverton, 1971. She had read these before, but she read them again, slower this time, reading not just the entries but the spaces between them, the pattern of the work, the geography of it. 5 counties across 30 years, hundreds of instruments, hundreds of pipes voiced and re-leathered and tuned and signed with the double D stamp on their feet. And then, page 247, 200. She almost missed it. The entry was short, shorter than most, and it was not under a church name. It was under a person's name, which Elias almost never did. Almost every entry in the book was institutional. A church, a chapel, a parish hall. This one was different. Fenwick Chapel, Ardell Township, November 1971. Treble pipe commissioned for the Alderley wedding. Deposit received, $16. Pipe to be voiced and delivered before the spring ceremony. She had read this before, but now she kept reading. Down the page, past entries she had already seen, and there at the bottom of the page in smaller letters than the rest, as if he had added it later and had less room than he needed. Note: this is a service contract. Payment received for a specific pipe to be installed in a specific instrument at a specific location. The pipe is the property of Fenwick Chapel upon delivery. It is not workshop inventory. It is not estate property. It belongs to the chapel from the date of deposit. November 1971. Wren sat very still, read it again, and again. The pipe is the property of Fenwick Chapel upon delivery. It is not workshop inventory. It is not estate property. He had written it down, carefully, deliberately, in the same careful slanting hand he used for everything important. A legal distinction stated plainly in a voicing book that was also a legal record of work performed and payment received. Sutton Drummond's claim was to the workshop contents. But if the little treble pipe was not workshop contents, if it was and had always been the property of Fenwick Chapel in Ardell Township, paid for in November of 1971, and therefore owned by them from that date forward, regardless of where it had been sitting for the last 51 years, then it was not Sutton's. And if the pipe was not Sutton's, if the central piece of the estate's claim, the most valuable voiced pipe in the entire workshop, the only one bearing Elias's maker's mark on a completed instrument, could be shown to belong to someone else entirely, then the whole argument started to look very different. She closed the book, sat in the lamplight with her hands flat on the cover. Elias had known. Had written that note in November of 1971, 23 years before Sutton ever walked through the door. Had written it not because he expected a legal dispute at that moment, but because he was a careful man who understood that what is written down outlasts what is remembered, and that a record made in honesty is a wall that holds long after the person who built it is gone. He had been building this defense for decades before he needed it, the way he had built everything, patient, exact. One piece at a time. She needed to find Harriet Alderley. She asked Sybil first the next morning. Sybil knew everyone in the county who had been alive longer than 30 years, which was most of the people Wren needed to know. She called from the workshop and the phone rang 4 times, and Sybil answered on the 5th. Harriet Alderley, Wren said. A pause. She's living, Sybil said. Out on the Fenwick Road, in the house she's been in since 1973. Why? I need to talk to her. Another pause. Longer. About the pipe, Sybil said. Yes. I'll call her grandson, Sybil said. He drives her places. Give me an hour. It took 2 hours. But at the end of 2 hours, Sybil called back with an address and a time, and the information that Harriet Alderley was 84 years old, still sharp as a new voicing knife, and had not to Sybil's knowledge ever in her life suffered a fool or wasted a word. Good, Wren thought. Neither have I. Harriet Alderley's house was white-clapboard with green shutters and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, and had been there long enough that the oak boards had gone silver with weather. Her grandson let Wren in and showed her to the front room, and then quietly disappeared the way good people do when they understand that what is about to happen is private. Harriet was in a wingback chair by the window, small, precise, the kind of old woman who has chosen consciously not to be diminished by age but simply refined by it. Everything inessential burned away, what remains absolutely clear. She looked at Wren the way Crispin Vane had looked at her the first day, taking her measure, not unkindly, but thoroughly. You bought Elias's shop, she said. Yes, ma'am. Sit down then. Wren sat. You found the pipe, Harriet said. Not a question. Yes, Wren said. In the foot of the ground pipe, with his tools and his voicing book and a letter. Harriet was quiet a moment. Her hands rested on the arms of the chair, small and still. Outside the window, the December light lay flat and pale on the fields. I stopped being angry about it a long time ago, she said. The pipe, I mean. The wedding was 51 years ago, and the marriage lasted 43 years, and Henry died in 2014, and I have 4 grandchildren, so... She paused. Whatever I expected from a wedding hymn, I suppose I got it the longer way around. Wren almost smiled. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. In 1971, when you commissioned the pipe, do you still have any record of it, any receipt, any documentation of the payment? Harriet looked at her, a long reading look. Why? She said. Wren told her. All of it. Sutton Drummond and the charcoal wool coat and the papers on the workbench and the 30 days and the estate claim to the workshop contents. She said it plainly and in order because Harriet Alderley was not a woman you managed. She was a woman you told the truth to and then let her decide what to do with it. When Wren finished, Harriet was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Wait here. She got up from the chair with the careful, deliberate movement of someone who has made peace with the pace her body requires now, and she left the room. Wren heard her in the hallway. A door. A drawer. The particular sound of someone who knows exactly where something is, because she has always known where it is. She came back with a tin box. Old. Painted with faded flowers. The kind of tin that gets used for important papers because it is sturdier than an envelope and because someone in the family decided long ago that certain things deserve a box. She opened it and took out a folded paper. Very old. The folds worn soft. She held it out to Wren without unfolding it. November 14th, 1971, she said. $16. Elias Drummond, organ builder, Wicket Mill Road, Stoverton. For commission and installation of 1 treble pipe in the great organ at Fenwick Chapel, Ardell Township. She paused. I kept it because my mother told me to keep every receipt for every significant purchase. She grew up in the Depression and she didn't trust memory. Wren took the paper, unfolded it. The ink was faint, but legible. The paper dry and clean in the way of things kept carefully in a tin box in a cool room for 50 years. Every word Harriet had recited was there. And at the bottom in Elias's hand. Payment received in full. Pipe to be installed at Fenwick Chapel upon voicing. Ownership of commissioned pipe vests in Fenwick Chapel from date of this receipt. She read it twice. Ownership vests from date of this receipt. He had written it on the receipt too. The same language. The same careful, deliberate, legally precise language. Written in 1971. Written before the will. Written before Sutton. Written before any of this. Elias Drummond had been a patient and thorough man, and he had been, it turned out also, a very thorough one. She looked up at Harriet. May I borrow this? Wren said. You may have it, Harriet said. I know what it says. I don't need to keep the paper to remember what I know. She sat back in her wingback chair and looked at Wren with those clear, unhurried eyes. "He was a good man," she said. "Slow, but good." A pause. "When you get the organ working, I'd like to hear my hymn." "I'll come get you myself," Wren said. "See that you do." She took the receipt to Crispin Vane the next morning. Crispin read it once, turned it over, read it again, and then set it on his desk, and looked at it for a long moment in the way of a man doing careful arithmetic. "The township sale transferred the building," he said. "Sutton's claim is to workshop contents as estate property." "Yes," Wren said. "But if a specific item within the workshop was legally the property of a third party prior to Elias's death," he tapped the receipt, "then that item was never estate property to begin with. It was never Elias's to bequeath. And if that's true of the pipe," he looked up, "it significantly complicates the claim that the workshop contents broadly fall under the estate." "That's what I thought," Wren said. "I'm not a lawyer," Crispin said. "Neither am I," Wren said. "But I can read." Crispin looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his expression. The same thing that had moved there when she first walked into his office with the tuning fork around her neck and $1 in her pocket. He reached for his phone. "I know someone in Bethlehem," he said. "She handles estate disputes. She owes me a favor from about 15 years back involving a historical society matter that I will not go into." He was already dialing. "She can tell us in about 20 minutes whether we have something or whether we're just hoping." They had something. The lawyer in Bethlehem was a woman named Elspeth Crane, 60-something, who spoke in short, declarative sentences and did not waste time on either reassurance or alarm. Crispin put her on speaker. She listened to the situation. She asked 3 questions. She was quiet for about 45 seconds. "The 1971 receipt establishes a service contract with a third-party ownership clause," she said. "That's not airtight, but it's substantial. More importantly, the voicing book entry uses the same language on the same date, which means you have 2 contemporaneous documents making the same claim. That's corroboration." Another pause. "The estate claim to workshop contents rests on the 1989 will, but that will can only govern what Elias actually owned at his death. If the treble pipe was third-party property from 1971 forward, it was never his to bequeath." "And if the pipe is excluded," Crispin said, "then the claim to the remaining contents needs to be re-examined in light of the township sale terms, which I'd want to look at more carefully." She paused. "But I'll say this plainly. If I were representing the other side and someone put these 2 documents in front of me, I would be having a very different conversation with my client about whether this was worth pursuing." Crispin thanked her, hung up. He and Wren sat across the desk from each other in the old feed store office with the grain scale still bolted to the counter and the winter light coming through the windows. "She's right," Crispin said. "It's not airtight." "No," Wren said, "but it's enough to make it expensive and uncertain for him to push forward." "Yes." Crispin was quiet a moment. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Not for the iron key this time. For a thick folder, old labeled in his neat handwriting. "Wicket Mill Road, Elias Drummond Historical." "I've been keeping this for 28 years, he said. "Everything the Historical Society has on Elias. Newspaper clippings. His business records that he filed with the township as a registered tradesman. Invoices." He set the folder on the desk between them. "Including his original business registration from 1962, which lists the workshop as a place of professional service, not a private residence. Which means the contents were professional tools and inventory, not personal estate." He opened the folder. 3rd page in. A carbon copy of a business registration form, 1962. Elias Drummond, organ builder. Workshop at Wicket Mill Road, Stoverton Township. All tools, materials, and instruments housed therein are professional property subject to the laws governing commercial enterprises. Wren stared at it. Professional property, not personal estate. "He registered as a business," Crispin said, "in 1962, before the will, before any of this." He looked up at her. "Which means his 1989 personal will may not govern the workshop contents at all. They were never personal property. They were business assets." She thought of Elias sitting at his bench in 1962. A young man then, new to the valley, setting up his business with a careful, deliberate hand, registering properly, keeping records properly, Not because he was thinking 60 years ahead, but because he was that kind of person. The kind who does things right from the beginning because doing things right from the beginning is simply how you do things. And in doing it right in 1962, he had made it right for whoever came after him. She called Sybil. "The man who came in September of 1994, she said. "The one in the city clothes. You said you saw him through the window." "Yes," Sybil said. "If you saw him now, would you know him?" A long pause. "Why?" Sybil said, carefully. "He's come back," Wren said. "He says his name is Sutton Drummond and he's claiming the workshop contents." The pause this time was different. The quality of it changed. Like something that has been in a drawer for a long time being taken out and looked at in new light. "Tall," Sybil said slowly. "The way he walked, like he'd decided where he was going before he got there." "Yes," Wren said. "And he didn't look at the organ," Sybil said. "I watched him through the window. He stood in the doorway of that shop and he looked at the walls and the ceiling and he never once looked at the organ." "That's him," Wren said. Another pause. "Elias shut the shop for 3 days after," Sybil said. "And when he came back to work, he was different, quieter, more settled." She paused. "I thought at the time he was grieving something, but I think now, I think he was deciding something. I think that visit was the thing that made him decide." "Decide to seal everything in the pipe," Wren said. "Yes," Sybil said. "I think that's right." She told Sutton on a Thursday. She called the number on his card, which was a Philadelphia area code, and when he answered, she said she had reviewed the situation and she had some documents she thought he should see before he proceeded further. He was quiet for a moment, the careful quiet of a man recalculating. "What documents?" he said. She told him. The 1971 receipt, the voicing book entry, the 1962 business registration, the township sale terms. She said it in the same plain declarative order she had used with Harriet Alderley because it was the right approach for anyone who deserved to be spoken to honestly. When she finished, he was quiet again, longer this time. "I'll need to consult with my attorney," he said. "Of course," Wren said. "This doesn't mean I'm withdrawing the claim." "I understand," Wren said. She waited. The low note breathed in the workshop around her, low and steady and unhurried. "The property developer," Sutton said finally, the first time he had mentioned the developer directly. "He's offering a significant amount for the parcel." "I know," Wren said. "The workshop isn't worth anything as an operational business. Pipe organs are a dying trade." And there it was. The real thing. The thing under all the legal language and the estate claims and the charcoal wool coat. Not grief for a great uncle he barely knew. Not a sense of family legacy or inherited responsibility. Just money, land, a developer with a checkbook and a parcel he wanted. She thought of the voicing book, of 30 years of no charge, of the Women's Guild keeping a historical building alive on bake sale money and Elias not adding to their burden, of the little pipe voiced and ready and waiting for a wedding that had happened 51 years ago. Pipe organs are a dying trade. He sees oak and fieldstone. He cannot hear the pipe. He never could. "Mr. Drummond," she said, "I'd like to play you something." A pause. "I beg your pardon." "Come to the workshop," she said. "Not to look at it, not to appraise it, just to come and listen for 10 minutes. And then we can talk." The silence on the line was long enough that she thought he might simply hang up. Then he said, "Friday morning." She said Friday morning. She spent Thursday voices 3 more pipes. Not because it would change anything legally, but because the work was the work and the pipes were waiting and there were 29 ranks left to go and she was not going to stop for Sutton Drummond or anyone else. She voiced a solitional, which was the string-voiced rank, narrow pipes with a thin, brilliant tone like the overtones of a violin, and she had to start them on barely more than a whisper of wind and coax the note up from almost nothing, patient, 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 until the string tone emerged clean and clear and singing. She voiced 2 stopped diapason pipes, round and warm, foundational. She wrote each one in the voicing book. And that night late, she went to the organ case and carefully, with clean hands and a steady heart, she fitted the little treble pipe into its rack. It slipped into its hole in the wind chest, with a small clean sound, the sound of something arriving in exactly the right place. She pressed the wind lever by hand and played the key that corresponded to the pipe's pitch. The note came out, thin and bright and pure. The voice of the very top of the treble range, the pipe that floats above everything else and gives the hymn its carrying quality, the note that travels to the back of a chapel and up into the rafters and back down again. The note that had been sitting in the foot of a dark pipe for 28 years, voiced and waiting, signed with a double D and 4 words in the name of a woman who had waited patiently for it. Wren played it once, and then she sat with her hands in her lap and the note fading in the air around her, and she thought about Elias at this bench in October of 1994. Old, slow-handed, knowing probably that his heart was not what it had been, fitting this one pipe and voicing it and writing in the book that he would deliver it Saturday, going to sleep that night believing he would, not making it to Saturday. She thought about what that must have cost him. The one thing he had promised and hadn't delivered. The debt, he called it in the letter. The thing he was ashamed of. All the no-charge entries and all the rebuilt organs and all the 50-cent fees for small congregations and all the careful honesty of a lifetime's work. And the thing that still sat unfinished in his chest at the end was one small pipe and one woman's wedding hymn. She is patient. So is the pipe. The workshop was quiet around her. The low note breathed. The little treble pipe sat in its rack, fitted and ready. Friday morning came gray and cold, the kind of December morning that feels like the sky has made a decision and is not interested in negotiating. Sutton arrived at 10. Same coat, same walk. He stood in the doorway and his eyes moved to the walls, the ceiling, the floor, the appraisal, the square footage. Wren was at the organ bench. "Sit down somewhere," she said, "or stand. It doesn't matter." He stayed in the doorway. She pumped the bellows lever with her foot. The great leather bellows, re-leathered now, holding the wind properly for the first time in 30 years, filled with a slow, deep breath. The wind chest pressurized. She could feel it through the keys. She played one chord. Just one. The pipes she had voiced so far, 29 of the 41 ranks, spoke together for the first time. The open diapason carrying the fundamental. The stop diapason warm underneath it. The solutional threading its string voice through the middle. The little treble pipe floating above everything else, bright and clear and carrying, not a full organ yet, but enough. Enough to fill the room, enough to move the air, enough to do what a chord does when it is played on a real pipe organ in a stone-walled room, which is to become something larger than sound, something closer to the physical sensation of a held breath released. She let the chord sustain. She watched Sutton Drummond in the doorway. His eyes stopped moving. She had not expected that exactly. She had not expected anything in particular. She had just known that she needed to play. Because Elias had been right about one thing above everything else. You cannot explain a pipe to someone. You cannot argue a person into hearing it. Either they can hear it or they cannot, and the only way to find out is to let it speak and see what happens. Something was happening. Sutton's face had not changed much. He was not a man who let his face change quickly. But his eyes had stopped moving and his body had gone very still in the doorway, and he was looking at the organ, at the pipes for the first time. Not at the walls. At the pipes. She let the chord go. The sound faded. The room went quiet. The low note breathed in under the silence. Sutton stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "He built that." "He built it," Wren said. "All 41 ranks, by himself, over 30 years. Every pipe made by hand, every measurement calculated by ear, every piece of wood fitted and joined and waiting." She paused. "He never got to hear it play. He died before the bellows were re-leathered and the voicing was finished." Another silence. "What you just played," he said, 29 ranks. I've voiced 29. There are 12 more to go." He looked at the pipes, the long, even rows, silver and wood patient in their racks. "He never talked about any of this," Sutton said, "to the family. He was the uncle nobody really knew, lived up in the country, fixed church organs." A pause. "My father thought he was wasting his life." Wren said nothing. "The developer is offering $400,000 for the parcel," Sutton said. I know, Wren said. That's a significant sum. It is. He looked at the organ. If I proceed with the estate claim, he said slowly, even if I win, even if a court decides the contents belong to the estate, I'd have to sell them. And who buys a half-voiced pipe organ in a building in rural Pennsylvania? He paused. I'd get nothing for it. It would go for scrap. Yes, Wren said. It would. The low note breathed. Sutton turned the papers over in his hands. The same papers he had laid on the workbench 11 days ago. He looked at them. Then he looked at the organ. Then he folded the papers twice into a smaller and smaller square. He set the folded papers on the workbench. The attorney's fees alone, he said, would probably exceed whatever the estate could recover. Probably, Wren said. He stood for another moment. Then he said, my great-uncle. Just that. Not a question. Not a statement exactly. More like a man hearing a word for the first time and understanding what it means. He was a good man, Wren said. A careful man. He gave away a third of his work for free across 50 years and never mentioned it to anyone. He built that organ because he needed to build it, not because anyone asked him to. And he left it here for whoever could hear it because he couldn't leave the knowing to die out entirely. Sutton looked at the folded papers on the bench. He didn't leave anything to the family, he said. No, Wren said, because the family didn't. He stopped. She waited. Couldn't hear it, he said, quietly. We couldn't hear it. The admission was small and clean, and it cost him something. She could see it cost him something, and she did not minimize it or rush past it because it deserved its moment. Even people who cannot hear the pipe deserve their moment. Sutton picked up the folded papers. He put them in his coat pocket. I'll tell the developer it's not available, he said. He walked to the door, stopped. He looked back at the organ, at the great pipe against the fieldstone wall, at the little treble pipe barely visible in its rack at the very top of the rank, the last pipe fitted. The first pipe voiced the one with 4 words scratched on its foot. Did he finish it? He said. The one he was working on when he died. No, Wren said. But I will. He nodded once, and left. She listened to the quiet car move down Wicket Mill Road and under the covered bridge and away. Then she turned back to the organ. 12 ranks left to voice. She got to work. The weeks that followed had a quality she had not experienced before. Not happiness exactly. Something steadier than happiness and less fragile. The feeling of work that is exactly right for the hands doing it. The feeling of being in the right place at the right time, not because someone arranged it, but because a long chain of careful, patient decisions by other people had made a space and she had walked into it. Ollie brought firewood and stayed to help with the bellows mechanism. Zibble brought food and the occasional piece of information about organ building that she had absorbed in 10 years of keeping house for Elias and had not known she retained until Wren's questions pulled it up. Crispin brought more of his historical society files and sat reading them at the workbench while she worked occasionally reading a passage aloud. Elias at a county fair in 1978 demonstrating pipe voicing. Elias receiving a letter of commendation from a denomination he had served for 20 years. Elias in a small newspaper photograph from 1985, standing in front of an organ he had just rebuilt, looking directly at the camera with the expression of a man who knows he has done the work exactly right. She put the photograph on the windowsill next to the framed picture of Mabel at her reed organ. The two of them looking at each other across the workbench. Two careful people who had understood the same thing from different directions. That the work was not about you. That the trade was not yours to keep. That knowledge passed on was knowledge that lived and knowledge hoarded was knowledge that died when you did. She voiced the trumpet rank on a Tuesday in January, which was the hardest rank she had attempted. The brass-voiced pipes with their vibrating brass tongues and their demand for a very particular wind pressure and a very particular voicing touch, or they brayed instead of sang. She spent 4 days on them, getting it wrong, starting over, getting closer, getting it wrong again in a different way, until finally on the 4th day, the whole rank sang together in the warm afternoon air of the workshop, not braying, not forcing, singing the bright, assertive voice of the brass rank sitting above the foundation voices below it and adding its particular quality to the whole. She wrote it in the voicing book. Trumpet rank, January. Don't start with more wind than you think you need. Start with less. The tongue will find its rate. Trust it. She wrote what she had learned from each rank. Not just the technical notes, the listening notes, the things you can only know by ear. Because the voicing book was not just a record. It was a teaching document. It was Elias teaching her from across 30 years, and she teaching whoever came after her from across however many years that would be. One knowing. Passed forward. In the third week of January, she voiced the Voix Celeste. She had been saving it. Not from fear, from respect. The Voix Celeste was the most delicate rank in the organ, the one Elias had marked to be tuned last when the room is warm, 2 pipes per note, tuned very slightly apart from each other so that their waveforms interfered and created the slow, gentle, wavering beat that gave the stop its name. Voice of the sky. The sound of something that is almost in tune but not quite the sweetness of almost the particular quality of 2 voices reaching toward each other across a small gap. She spent a full day on it. She finished on a Thursday afternoon in the pale low light of late January. She played a single note on the Voix Celeste. The 2 pipes spoke together. Their waves met and parted and met again. The beat rose and fell, slow and patient and heartbreaking in the best way, the way something is heartbreaking when it is exactly as beautiful as it should be. She sat at the organ bench in the warm workshop and listened to the 2 voices reaching toward each other. And then she pulled all the stops she had voiced. All 29 ranks now voiced and tuned the whole instrument as far as it had come. She set her feet to the pedals where the great low ranks lived. She placed her hands on the keys. She played. Not a piece she knew by name, just what came. The open diapason carrying the ground, the stop diapason underneath it, the solutional threading through, the trumpet bright and sure above the middle, and at the very top the little treble pipe, Harriet's pipe, floating above everything else. And below all of it, the ground pipe against the fieldstone wall, the one voice that had never stopped breathing its low note as it always had, the foundation under the foundation. The workshop filled with sound, not perfectly. There were 12 ranks still to voice, and she could hear the gaps where they would sit when she got to them. But what was there was true. Every pipe in tune with itself before it was in tune with its neighbors. Every voice speaking cleanly without hiss or waver, the way Mabel had described and Elias had written, and she had spent 3 months learning to hear. The sound went up to the old rafters and came back down. It moved through the fieldstone walls and out through the board and batten siding and into the cold January air of Wicket Mill Road. She played until the sound felt complete. Then she let it go. The workshop went quiet. The low note breathed back in under the silence. She sat at the bench with her hands in her lap. She thought of Elias dead at this bench in October, the knife still in his hand. She thought of Mabel in the back room behind the parish hall teaching a 9-year-old the difference between a forced voice and a true one. She thought of Harriet Alderley in her wingback chair with the tin box and the 51-year-old receipt. She thought of the long chain of careful people who had understood that you don't keep the knowing, you pass it. She opened the voicing book to the next blank page. She wrote the date. She wrote all stops voice to this point. The instrument is speaking. 12 ranks remain. Then she wrote something she had not planned to write, something that came up from the same place the notes came from when she wasn't thinking about what to play. This book belongs to whoever finds it. If you are reading this, you are the next voice in the room. Welcome. Start with the ground. Make sure it is true before you build anything on top of it. And when you find a pipe that will not speak cleanly, don't force it. Cut the wind down. Let the lip find its speech. The pipe knows what it needs. Your job is to listen until you can hear what that is. She set the pen down, looked at what she had written, her handwriting under Elias's, his under the previous keeper's if there had been one. The chain continuing, she closed the book. Spring came the way spring comes to that part of Pennsylvania. Slowly then, all at once, the hardwoods on the ridge putting out their first tentative green, the creek below the covered bridge running high and cold, the mud on Wicket Mill Road, going from frozen to impossible to navigable over the course of about 6 weeks. And on the first warm Saturday in April, Wren drove her used truck, the 2006 Ford she had bought in December, with part of the coin money down to the white clapboard house on the Fenwick Road, and she helped Harriet Alderley into the passenger seat, and she drove her to the chapel. Harriet was quiet for most of the drive. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the spring landscape go past the window. Fields going green, blossoms on the wild plum along the road, the sky the particular blue of an April morning in the Pennsylvania hills, clear and deep and going on. "How does it sound?" she said finally. "Good," Wren said. "Not finished yet, but good." "Will I be able to hear my hymn?" "Yes," Wren said. "I set the treble pipe in last month. It's ready." Harriet nodded once, looked back out the window. "He always meant to bring it himself," she said. "I know," Wren said. "I stopped minding a long time ago." She paused. "But I'll be glad to hear it." The chapel at Fenwick was a small white building at the end of a gravel drive, the kind of building that has been there longer than anyone can clearly remember and will probably be there longer than anyone can clearly imagine. Stone foundation, white clapboard, a small bell tower with no bell in it anymore. The doors needed paint. The steps had settled unevenly. But the windows were clean and the churchyard was kept, and inside the organ Elias had rebuilt in 1963 sat in the back of the chancel, its pipes dusty and patient. Wren spent an hour with the chapel organ, cleaning, testing, running the bellows. The instrument was old and had been sitting without regular maintenance for longer than was ideal, but Elias had built it well and built it to last, and with an hour's attention it was functional. Not perfect, but true where it mattered. She set the little treble pipe in its rack, then she went to get Harriet. Ollie was there. He had not been asked exactly, but he had heard through the particular information network of a small township where everyone has known everyone else for decades that something was happening at Fenwick Chapel on Saturday morning. He stood at the back of the chancel in his good coat, which was dark blue, and showed he had made an effort with his cap in his hands. Sybil was there. She sat in the third pew with her hands folded and her back straight, and the expression of a woman who has been waiting for something to be finished and is very glad it is being finished. Crispin Vane was there. He sat in the second pew with a small notebook which he held but did not open in the way people hold things when they are not sure what to do with their hands. Harriet Alderley walked down the aisle with Wren's hand on her arm and sat in the front pew. She arranged herself precisely the way she did everything. Hands in her lap, eyes forward, ready. Wren sat at the organ bench. She pulled the stops she needed, the foundation stops, the strings for warmth, the trumpet for brightness, and at the very top of the chain, the treble pipe, the stop that would carry the melody above everything else. She set her hands on the keys. She played the first chord. The chapel filled with sound, not the workshop. The chapel with its stone foundation and its old walls and its ceiling that had been shaped for exactly this, for music to rise into and be held and return to the people sitting below. The sound was different here, warmer, rounder, the way sound is when the room it is in has been built for it. She played Harriet's hymn. It was a simple tune, the kind of hymn that has been sung so many times in so many places that it has worn smooth the way water wears stone smooth, all the unnecessary parts polished away until only the essential shape remains. She played it straight through once, and then again with the full organ, all the stops the foundation voices carrying and the middle voices warming and the solitional threading its string tone through and the trumpet bright above and the little treble pipe at the very top, voiced by Elias in October of 1994, floating above everything else with the quality of something that has been waiting a very long time and is very glad to finally be heard. She let the last chord sustain. Then she let it go. The sound rose to the ceiling and came back down, and slowly, gently, like a tide going out, it faded. The chapel was very quiet. Wren turned on the bench. Harriet Alderley sat in the front pew with her hands in her lap and her eyes closed. Not crying, not smiling exactly, just very still, with the look of someone who has come to the end of a long wait and found it was worth it. She sat that way for a while. Then she opened her eyes. "He was always slow," she said, "because he was always careful." She looked at Wren. "Thank you," she said, just those two words, but the way she said them, the weight in them, the 51 years in them. Wren nodded. She couldn't speak for a moment, which was fine because Harriet wasn't waiting for speech. On the drive back, Harriet was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been on the way there. The quietness of completion instead of anticipation, When they reached the white-clapboard house and Wren helped her to the door, Harriet paused with her hand on the doorframe. "The organ in your shop," she said, "when it's finished." "Yes," Wren said. "I'd like to hear it." "You will," Wren said. "I promise." "Good." She looked at Wren for a moment, clear eyes unhurried. "You're very like him, you know, not in looks, in the way you work." She paused. "He never hurried a voice either." She went inside. Wren drove back to Wicket Mill Road in the April morning with the windows down and the spring air coming in cold and green-smelling, and the hills on either side of the road putting out their new leaves. She crossed the covered bridge, the boards drumming hollow under the truck tires. She pulled onto the gravel apron of the workshop. She sat in the truck for a moment, engine off in the quiet. Then she got out and went inside. The low note was there. Of course it was. Low and steady and unhurried. The valley wind coming down off the ridge and pressing through the stone and up through the channel and into the great pipe's throat and out its patient mouth. The same as it had always been. The same as it would be. She crossed to the organ. 12 ranks still to voice. She took the next pipe from its rack, set it to the wind tester, held her breath, and listened. The pipe tried, struggled, found it, she wrote in the voicing book. And outside the workshop on Wicket Mill Road in the warm April morning, the valley woke up around her the way it did every spring. Unhurried and certain, the ridge going green and the creek running cold and the hardwoods putting out their leaves again, and the one true note breathing under all of it, the same note it had been breathing for 30 years, patient as the pipe, steady as the ground it came from, keeping the one voice alive in the dark, so that when someone finally came down that forgotten road and stopped at the door and listened, there would be something here to hear. There had been. There was. And there would be for whoever came next.